Here we can add another lens, historical materialism. Kalko emphasizes the Vietnamese Communist evolution in theory and practice, grounded in a historical materialist approach. In social sciences, this is often associated with Marxism. On a general level, this lens analyzes, first, the society's material conditions. The options for survival in, for example, a rainforest will differ from a desert. Second, under such conditions, how does society produce, distribute, and reproduce its material needs? In Marx's jargon, this is the mode of production. Third, the social relations, especially class, property, and gender, that emerge, the relations of production. Fourth, the ideas that emerge, especially culture, which normalizes the social relations, making them reproducible, thus relatively static. This last layer is more surface level, the superstructure. Now, ideas and material conditions are interacting in a cyclical manner in the systems level as well. The point of this linear list is to understand the function of culture as an adaptation to reproduce society under material constraints. This is the materialist approach. Historical materialism views historical change on the systems level as emerging from the clash between the second step, in particular the dynamism of technology and labor, the forces of production, and the third step, the established, thus relatively static, class, property, and gender roles. The first obvious example is the effects mechanization and automation have on entire professions, drastically altering bargaining power, and the spillover cultural effects. The second important example that deserves wider attention is the effects of wartime restructuring of labor. World War I, and especially World War II, are most striking, given their influence on today's norms, which we take for granted. Working class men were grouped together in the military, increasing their organizing and thus bargaining power. This led to soldiers and veterans bargaining for socialized healthcare and education. The factory jobs they left behind were filled by women, leaving their isolated domestic homes, and minorities, now doing the work they were previously excluded from, and better organized in the workplace. This led to breakthroughs in feminist and civil rights movements, which also bolstered labor union movements. Thus, historical materialism means using a materialist approach to explain historical change. Remember, no lens sees everything in optimal clarity. Each lens starts with certain limiting assumptions in order to view something specific more clearly. The historical materialist lens is specifically useful for unearthing the systems level. Of course, any tool can be used crudely. In the case of materialism, see my review of Jared Diamond's bestseller, Guns, Germs, and Steel: The Fates of Human Societies. We can contrast this four-step materialist approach with the idealist approach, which starts with ideas, often in the abstract, detached from material conditions, basically starting in reverse, and often just getting stuck on the culture step without reattaching to the other steps. We can see in our World War example how structural change was not simply from people's ideas becoming more progressive in the abstract. It took the war's systemic material changes, providing more bargaining power for certain pre-existing ideas of political equality, to win by example. Egalitarian politics, the leveling of class and gender hierarchies. This wasn't invented by the European Enlightenment or the post-war welfare state. This goes way back to hunting-gathering, to the evolution of human nature. What is Politics has the best videos on all of this, featuring materialist anthropology. There are always limited resources in organizing bargaining power for the bottom classes, so it makes sense to prioritize a materialist lens, to think on the systems level, to anticipate opportunities by analyzing leverage points and feedback loops. Okay, that's a general definition. Let's bring it to life and see how the Vietnamese Communists applied historical materialism, according to Kalko. First, understanding your own limitations. In this case, the material conditions of being a small, decentralized country, lacking manufacturing technologies and military hard power, targeted by foreign powers for access to China's markets. This understanding led to actions being dictated by critical realism in the form of pragmatic, protracted struggle, relying on soft power. This is a check on hubris, a condition that plagues imperialists. Speaking of imperialist hubris failing in small decentralized countries, we should immediately think of Afghanistan. Second, understanding your own strengths. In this case, filling in the soft power political vacuum by organizing to build domestic social legitimacy, especially with the mass base of poor and landless peasants. This meant a protracted struggle that went beyond military hard power. We mentioned earlier the contrast in bargaining power between unorganized versus organized. From an anthropology lens, a weakness of rural peasant decentralization is being isolated and lacking communication and knowledge of the outside world, which organizing can help overcome. Kalko writes that, much larger than the Communist Party, mass organizations of Vietnamese peasants, women, students, elderly workers existed since 1930. Along with local people's committees. There was a careful balancing act between following grassroots demands versus party leadership. Also, balancing peasant class demands, especially land reform, versus cross-class alliances with patriotic landlords and bourgeoisie. I would add the following framing: an organized, so better integration, relatively egalitarian society, so less hierarchy, a flatter class pyramid. This means more resilience against colonialism's divide and rule playbook. Third, understanding the opposition's strengths and limitations. In this case, understanding how French and anti-communist collaborators, and in the next war the US, all relied on expensive hard power and lacked soft power legitimacy in Vietnam's peasant base, thus building strategies to expose the opposition's contradictions. Protracted war forced mounting costs and dwindling soft power morale. Fourth, international framework. In this case, having a critically pragmatic analysis of the balance of powers, a nuanced understanding of international actors, and how to navigate between them, especially the US, China, and the USSR. This relates to a small country's self-critical realism. Vietnamese communist leaders, like Ho Chi Minh, had early experiences abroad, unlike Stalin and Mao, with not just Western education and experiences, but also experiences in the USSR, China, and Japan. I'll mention transnational class analysis in the resources chapter. Fifth, role of the party. In this case, experience providing continuity for political consciousness between crises, and we've seen there's been many crises. Being self-critical, pluralist, and adaptive to real-world experiences, rather than rigid, grand theory based on abstract ideals. Disciplined cadres who organize peasants on the village level. An emphasis on the critical role of the individual in terms of revolutionary morality and personal responsibility, which Kalko describes as an innovation to Marxism. One cost here was insufficient family life, not to mention the high sacrifices of protracted war. With this list breaking down the Vietnamese Communists' historical materialist approach to theory and practice, I'll leave you to ponder how this compares with the current US opposition in Iran and Israeli opposition in Lebanon. I'll come back to this at the end of the chapter.